Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasul al-Kareem, wa ba'd. Today, I was going to be doing the tafsir, but events that occurred on the 9th into the 10th of Jumad Al-Ula prevented me from doing this. And that event was the murder and martyrdom of the Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī. I wanted to discuss with you a number of things about his life, simply because of the fact that it's not often that we have the opportunity to discuss who the maraji' are and what exactly they've done and how that impacts us, because we're impacted by the things that they do, because the maraji' have what is known as global jurisdiction, and we will have to talk about this shortly, inshallah. After I finish, obviously if there are questions, then we can try to field them. I want to first give a very short explanation of exactly what occurred, and then start to talk about the life of the Imam. On the 9th going into the 10th of Jumad Al-Ula, 1434, faceless cowards went into the Al-Mazra'ah district in Damascus to Masjid Al-Iman and set off a bomb that killed 50 or more people. One of those people being Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī. The rest were students of knowledge. It was during a dars that was being recorded, and a number of slaves of Allah were killed. His grandson was, some of the brothers from the Nasim Sham website, along with other unnamed slaves of Allah that are students of knowledge nonetheless, and we ask that Allah gives them the highest palisades of the paradise. Imam al-Būṭī's name was surrounded before his death in the English-speaking world, and to a lesser extent in Arabic, but more amplified in the English-speaking world as a government stooge, someone that was on the payroll and looking out for himself, and that he was a government scholar, and many other bizarre things that were attributed to him. But we have to discuss who he is, his jurisdiction, and what exactly that means for us. The Imam, rahimahullah, was born 88 or 89 years ago, because the year he was born in was a leap year on the Muslim calendar. So he was born 88 or 89 years ago. And his full name is Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān, the son of Mullah Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī, Al-Shafi'ii, Al-Ash'ari, Al-Kurdi, Al-Dimashqi, from the land of Sham. So his name is Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān. His father's name is Mullah Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī. He was Shafi'ii in his fiqh, Ash'ari in his creed, Kurdish in his extraction, and Damascene in his living space. He was born in what is called the island of Ibn Omar, which is near Turkey and falls within the boundaries of South Iraq. The reason why he wound up in Damascus is because his father, Mullah Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī, decided to make hijrah and move the family. During that time, Mullah Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī had jurisdiction and was a marja' in his own right during the Ottoman period. Iraq started to be carved up and broken up. The place called Granj was invented, which was later named Kuwait. Iraq was broken up into districts and new protectorates, and this put the ulama in a very difficult place. The Kurdish have a long history. To mention this to you, Imam Salahuddin Al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah, the great freedom fighter for Islam, and one of the imams of his time, was a Kurd. When you look at so many others throughout history, his father who started the Ayyubid dynasty, Salahuddin Al-Ayyubi's father, who started the Ayyubid dynasty, obviously is Kurdish, and there have been many great Kurdish achievements. Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī is Kurdish, Imam Wahb al-Zuhayli is Kurdish, Ismail ibn Badran is Kurdish, Imam Abdul Rahman al-Shami is Kurdish, his brother Salih is, obviously, their father. So there's a long history of Kurds. But we wouldn't know that they were Kurdish by how they speak, because their tongue is Arabic. They speak Arabic, and it sounds as if it's their first language, although they speak Kurdish. So this Imam, Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī, born on an island called the island of Ibn Omar, because Ibn Omar named it, and the jurisdiction in South Iraq. His father, Mullah Ramadan, moved the family to Damascus. And during that time, Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī was 4 years old. At 4 years old, his father took him by the hand to do his initial education. And he started out his initial education with perfecting his knowledge of Arabic, the memorization of the Quran with its tajweed. Hafs and Asim was his specialty. But he had a full working knowledge of the others, although his preference was Hafs and Asim. You find most Shafi'is, with the exception of Yemen, where it's Hamza, the riwayah. Most of the Shafi'is that you will know of will recite the Fatiha from Hafs and Asim, whereas the Yemenis, you'll find a large proportion of them will recite from the riwayah of Hamza. So when they recite the Fatiha, Ihdina az-Sirāta al-Mustaqīm, instead of Ihdina az-Sirāta, Ihdina az-Sirāta, will have this sound. But the Imam was not from that category, he was from Sham. So he completed the Quran, he completed his beginning and secondary education. After that time, when he was some 17 to 18 years of age, he made the journey to Egypt. While in Egypt, he studied usul fiqh and higher levels of fiqh. He went through the foundational books of his madhab. He went through the intermediate books of his madhab. In his final interview, he said, I did not realize how quickly I accelerated from going from mudarris to sheikh to alim. I thought this was only part of a fast-track program, but I was later told that I had mufawaqa, meaning that I had actually excelled. So he didn't realize at that young time that he was accelerating through the different levels of Sharia. He had no idea that he was so quick. He just knew that he was the youngest in his class and that he was the sharpest in his class. In his usul fiqh class were numerous visiting scholars and scholars who would become the best of their time after him. One of their usul fiqh teachers was a man by the name of Mahmud Shaltut. He was a big Hanafi judge. But during this time, Mahmud Shaltut was bringing the Mu'tazila theology into Al-Azhar. And it was something that was soundly rejected by the scholars that had come from Sham. And it was the beginning of 40 years of arguments and debates between Imam Al-Būṭī on one side with all the ulama of Sham that had come with him, and between Mahmud Shaltut, who was spreading doctrines in Al-Azhar, such as that the punishment of the grave is ahad, therefore it's not part of the creed, that Nabiyuna Isa alayhi salam is dead and will not return again, that the Quran is created, that Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is the Mu'tazila. A lot of these doctrinal positions were situations that had scholars, genuine scholars of Al-Azhar, up in arms. Imam Al-Būṭī at this time was 18 or 19. Mahmud Shaltut was in the height of his powers. He was a full-grown man. And so he had a very sharp tongue and he had a very eloquent tongue. And so some of the students were impressed by his tongue simply because he appeared to be sharper and more eloquent. But Imam Al-Būṭī was able to see through that. There were also Kurdish people that had come from the same region of Imam Al-Būṭī that had joined the Kurdish Workers' Party. So there was a secular edge that was there. But Imam Al-Būṭī managed to stay completely separate from that. He finished his studies in Usul Fiqh in the year 1365. He returned to Sham under the post of a faqih, and he was teaching at-Tarbiyatul Islamiyya at the University of Damascus. He did this for 5 years. And during this time, he also opened a section within the University of Damascus for theology. The theology at Damascus University was not as strong as it could have been. There wasn't a comparative theology department. Imam Al-Būṭī had studied a high level of comparative theology. After those 5 years completed, he returned back to Egypt to study the Sharia again. And he studied the different branches of Sharia. Now, I mentioned this before and it is significant. The Sharia has 18 sciences in revealed law. There are 18 sciences of revealed law. When you look at the breakdown of the sciences, they fall into 3 huge boxes or rings: Islam, Fiqh, Iman, I'tiqad or Creed, and Ihsan, which is the worship of Allah as if you see Him, or excellence. And that breaks down into Zuhud on one side, which is internal states of the heart, and the Suluk, which is the external form. Now within that, after your Fard Ayn knowledge, there's a breakdown that comes from the book of Mu'ammilat in Fiqh. And the Mu'ammilat breaks into your categories of what are called Hiraf. Hiraf are your occupations. And this is called your Al-Manah Al-Mar'iyya. Al-Manah Al-Mar'iyya means your trades, so your math, all your other things, they come out of Sharia. Those things are Fard Kifaya. You have Fard Ayn and Fard Kifaya. Fard Ayn is knowledge that everyone must have. Your basic fiqh, your basic creed, your basic ihsan. Your Fard Kifaya is knowledge that a particular set of human beings need to have. And Imam Al-Būṭī was one of those human beings that combined between one of those. Because when we look at our scientific history, and this is important, all the founders of our scientific background were ulama. The founders of geography, math, geology, paleontology, sociology, ethnology, all of them in the English-speaking language, they were laymen. And now they have PhDs or doctorate studies for them. The founders of math, science, geology, sociology, for the Muslims, were ulama. They started out as ulama. So Imam Al-Būṭī and Al-Azhar studied the branches of the revealed law, but then also studied the Manah Al-Mar'iyya, which was the Fard Kifaya aspects. And so if you're looking at him from that aspect, he also studied science. And the particular areas he studied on were sociology, psychology, and the philosophy of self. These were the areas that he studied with and perfected them. He also studied what's called Falsafatul Islam, which is the philosophy of Islam. And by falsafa, it means understanding what someone's mind and body should be like and how they should embody and carry out Islam. He studied ilm al-kalam, which is the use of speculative theology. Now, being an Ash'ari, he would have studied that. So he studied that, and he carried on for a number of years until he finished the highest category they had. He had mufawaqa, which means the highest excelling grade that one could have. He married when he was 18 years old, and his first marriage lasted for 15 years. He had 3 boys and 1 girl. However, at one point, his wife explained that she was happy for him to take a second wife. So he married again. But his second wife only lived for 3 years. And they had no children together. He married a third time, and his third marriage, a few years, 3 years after his third marriage, his first wife died. And so it left him with just 1 wife. The Imam continued his studies and had studied under his father a great deal. One thing Mullah Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī had told his son, which is Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī, who we're discussing today, is he said that the external form of Sharia is only visible when the internal form exists. So the external form of Sharia is only visible when the internal form exists. And what that means is that any manifestation of the Sharia without the internal state to match it is nifaq. So one must have a pure intention, which means ikhlas, sincerity. So one must be mukhlis. Now, around this time, his father and ulama of Damascus, in Egypt, this had already been said of him, that they had declared marja'iyah for him. Now we have to discuss marja'iyah before we go into the rest of his life. There are 7 types of people on earth according to their knowledge. There are 7 types of people on earth according to their knowledge. We're only talking about people according to their knowledge. The first type is called the mujtahid al-mutlaq. This is the absolute mujtahid. The absolute mujtahid. This individual has memorized the Quran. And when we mean memorized, it means that all 14 of its riwayat. So he knows Hafs and Asim. He knows Warsh and Qalun and Nafi'. He knows Hamza. He knows Susi. He knows Abu Ja'far. He knows all of these narrations. Ibn Kathir. He knows these narrations. He has memorized all of the ahadith, which are 1 million sahih ahadith, spread over 500 collections. Many of us have only heard of the 6 hadith collections: Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Nasa'i. Many of us have only heard of these 6. However, there are others like Quda'i, the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, the Muwatta, Ibn Hibban. There are all these different collections. But the absolute mujtahid has complete access to all of this knowledge. His theology is also correct. He has an encompassing knowledge of the Arabic language. So those things can properly be implemented. And he lays down usul. He lays down rulings and also principles based upon the broad understanding of the revealed law. Now we need to make a difference here between usul and funun. Usul are what comes from the revealed laws texts, which are the book, the sunnah, ijma', the consensus, analogy, and whatever forms of principles that the mujtahid mutlaq is utilizing. Out of usul come funun. Funun are things like mathematics, algebra, calculus, the breakdowns of your social sciences, your hit off your occupations. All of those things developed out of usul. Imam al-Khwarizmi developed algebra because of the difficulty in the permutations that are in the Quran regarding inheritance. Imam al-Qalqala brought about calculus because of statements in the Quran and Sunnah by Allah and His Messenger alayhim as-salatu was-salam regarding certain matters. So these things developed as funun, as branches that are coming from the revealed law. Today, in the English-speaking world, we study funun first. When your parents or others send you to school, you study your math, your science, your other things. So there's some people who finish school and they don't know how to make wudu. They don't know how to pray. They don't know how to fast. Because they have studied upside down according to the paradigm of revealed law. They've studied upside down. The absolute mujtahid lays down usul, principles based on the revealed law. Now, there are students or people that come after him that are called mujtahid al-mutlaq fil madhhab, the absolute mujtahid within the madhhab. Examples of absolute mujtahids are the four imams. Absolute mujtahids within the madhhab. Absolute mujtahids within the madhhab include the students of the four imams and scholars that have come after. Who are those scholars that come after? What would we notice for an absolute mujtahid within his madhhab? He has mastered all the books foundationally of his school. This is after Quran and Sunnah. He's mastered the Quran. He's mastered at least 400,000 ahadith, or within that neighborhood. He knows the foundational books of his madhhab, and he uses the usul laid down by his particular imam. However, he may differ with his imam in branch issues because he is allowed to derive new rulings. There is a third category of people on earth. The third category of people on earth are what are known as mujtahid al-murajjih. These are called the preferential mujtahid, mujtahid al-murajjih. The preferential mujtahid has the ability to tell you and join between all the particular texts within his school and the evidences that are within the school, and to tell you what the strongest position is on any given matter. This is the preferential mujtahid. Examples, as I've said, of absolute mujtahids within the school: students of the four imams, Imam Muwafiquddin ibn Qudama, Shaykh Al-Qadir Al-Jilani, Al-Ghazali. These are peoples that within their school are absolute mujtahids, but within the usul of their school. Preferential mujtahids include people such as Imams Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, Alauddin al-Mardawi. These are people that can tell you what the final ruling is on any given mas'ala. There is another type of mujtahid. The fourth type of mujtahid is called the mujtahid al-mukharrij. The mujtahid al-mukharrij. Now, the mujtahid al-mukharrij is called the mujtahid of derivation. These mujtahids gather together rulings and give new evidences and give new explanations on events that have not happened before. So they can tell you, this is what has happened. This is therefore the answer. These are the people that derive rulings and answer questions on new matters. And these new matters will be national in scope, meaning they will be global. They will be global in their scope. The Mujtahid al-Mukharrij, the Mujtahid of derivation. The next type of Mujtahid is the Mujtahid Iftah. The Mujtahid Iftah. Mujtahid of Fatwa. These are Mujtahids that can tell you what the ruling is within a school or all four of them. They can tell you what it is. And they can advise you. And the Mujtahid Iftah appoint, these people are usually also referred to as Fuqaha. They appoint the muftis for the masjids in the Muslim heartlands. Mufti leads the salah, a real mufti. You finish the salah, you ask the mufti a question about wudu and salah. He answers it. You ask the mufti, though, about a new issue. A new issue called mitochondrial three-parent DNA transference. First of all, he asks you to say that again. Second of all, after that, he then says, I do not know, or please come back tomorrow. Why is he saying please come back tomorrow? Because he needs to ask the alim that appointed him, who's a mujtahid, who can do ijtihad and tell him what the new issue is, because the mufti that's been appointed by the mujtahid iftah can only tell you this is what the ulama say. That's his job to do that. Nowadays, you have people that say that they're muftis that try to make ijtihad. That's completely backwards. The mufti doesn't make ijtihad. He tells you about things that happened before. And if it's new things, he'll tell you the ulama have said this, but he himself can't tell you what to do. He is an expounder of the law, not a giver of law. The final of the mujtahids is called the mujtahid fil masail, the mujtahid in particular issues. There are certain people, they specialize in certain areas, inheritance. There are people that specialize in maqasid al-shar'iyya. There are people that specialize in marriage and divorce case law. These are people who they have a free hand in those areas, but not others. Now, the first type of mujtahid, the mujtahid mutlaq, the last of the mujtahid mutlaqs, the last of the absolute mujtahids was Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah. He died 241. There has not been someone that's memorized all the Quran and 1 million ahadith in more than 1200 years. This has been documented by Imam Dawood Al-Ani Al-Khalidi, by Ibn Salah, by Alawi Al-Haddad, and many others. There are no absolute mujtahids and have not been since Imam Ahmad's death. If someone tells you now that they don't follow anything and they're an absolute mujtahid or they look at their own rules, your answer, your question to them is, you want to listen to all of their Quran and you want to know all of their hadith and where did they find the 500 collections and how many continents have they visited to obtain them. Because such an individual is deranged, a fool, or a false prophet or a false teacher. The second type of mujtahid is the absolute mujtahid within the school. The absolute mujtahid within the school, they died out. They died out and they have not existed since the 7th century of the Hijrah. They died out in the 7th century of the Hijrah. The preferential mujtahid died out. The last preferential mujtahid died 885 Hijri. His name? Alauddin al-Mardawi. There has not been a mujtahid like that since. The remaining categories of mujtahid are extant even today and continue to exist. So, the mujtahid of derivation, who derives new issues, exists today. The one that exists today include people like Mullah Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī, the father of Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī. Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī is one such mujtahid. He is a mujtahid of derivation. He deals with these matters and answers global matter questions. You don't ask him about your wudu. You don't ask him, where should I place my hands? That's not why he's there. He's not there for that purpose. He appoints the people that will answer your questions when you do need to ask those, but he doesn't answer those questions. He does not answer those questions. So he was given marja'iyah. He was certified as marja' by his father and by other ulama around him. His marja'iyah was certified just before his 40th year. So he was young when he had marja'iyah, when he became marja'. He began teaching theology, giving rulings, and also teaching people all across the world. Those people that he was teaching are the 7th category of people on earth according to their knowledge, which are us, the common laity. Number 7, way at the bottom. We'll always be around. Most of the Ummah have always been laymen. Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī set about teaching the Ummah. And what he did, along with other ulama, is absolutely crucial. The mujtahids, or the scholars of derivation, the most important of them are coming from Sham and Iraq. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, these mujtahids continued the role of teaching people. But a great many of them were murdered after the collapse of the Ottomans, which is 1336 Hijri or 1919 of the Kafir calendar. Consolidation forces, CF, killed, according to estimates, across the Muslim world as many as 5,000 ulama, simply to try to get rid of, dispense with, obfuscate, damage, and generally eviscerate and demolish any individual who knew how to implement revealed law, demolish and bring government, to build government, and how it was supposed to be done. They wanted to eliminate anyone that was able to do that. They failed miserably, but they made a good attempt at doing that. One of the first issues that Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī faced is that he had to go back to Egypt because Mahmud Shaltut was still teaching the people false theology. He held a symposium that was called the 5 Madhab Conference. And at the 5 Madhab Conference, he declared the 12ers, the 12er Ithna Ashari Shia, to be a 5th madhab. And he also said that many of the doctrines for which the Ahmadiyya were being denounced, the people who follow Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, he said many of the doctrines for which they were being denounced are minor issues. He considered whether Nabiyyuna Isa alayhi salam was dead in Srinagar, India, a minor issue. And whether Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian was both the Mahdi and Isa combined, he considered that a minor issue. He was rightly denounced, and vigorously so. He also attempted and was the first to try to draw a line between Islam on a personal level and Islam on a global level. Mahmoud Shaltut began to discuss about al-farq bayn al-masjidi wa dawla, the separation of masjid and state. And this is borrowed directly from the United States and other places. And it made absolutely no sense to anyone else, but the ulama understood what this meant. And again, they were denounced, they were fought with the pen and otherwise. Imam Al-Būṭī was shuttling back and forth between Egypt and Sham, because the French were putting a footmark on Sham as well and breaking it up. So you had Transjordan, Palestine, and then Palestine broke up into Israel and then Palestine itself, so the West Bank and Gaza. Jordan was created, Lebanon was created, Syria was created. All of that area was just Sham. Their accents are all the same, but it was created by all of these different consolidation forces, the French, the British, the Americans. They all dug in and broke up these areas. The marja, the job of the marja, was to continue to be both the temporal and spiritual head of the Ummah, because they're the temporal and spiritual heads of the Ummah. The evidence of this being easily discernible in Surah An-Nisa, the 4th Surah 59. You who believe, obey Allah, obey the Messenger, and those in authority among you. Surah At-Tawbah, the 9th Surah 122. It is not for all of you to march out into battle, but let there be a group from the believers that stays behind, that delves deeply into the religion and admonishes those that return so that they might take heed. Surah An-Nisa, further on, when Allah says, why didn't they come to the messenger or ask those who were in charge of doing istinbat? Istinbat being deriving the rulings. Right? Surah An-Nahl, Ayah 116, the 16th Surah, Ayah 116, ask those who you know. If you do not know, Ahl al-Dhikr are classed as the marja people. So these were the people that were in charge of the Ummah's affairs. They wrote books, they taught, they built schools, they continued the distribution of zakah. When someone comes today and says, well, zakah isn't distributed properly anymore, they haven't been to Nablus. They haven't been to Damascus. They haven't been to Lebanon, north or south. Now, it's fine if they want to have that as their own personal belief, that's fine. But that's untrue. Imam Al-Būṭī returns back to Sham. He continues the teaching, but sees that secular universities have been built alongside of the Mahads. Normally, when you're a young Muslim in the Muslim heartlands, you go through 3 forms of education. Your parents will have already learned the 3 rings of Islam. Islam, fiqh, Iman, creed, ihsan, so on and so forth. When you're young, they teach you these basic things. When you reach 6 or 7, now you go to the masjid. When you come into the masjid, you can already read. You might already know some surahs. You already know how to make wudu by yourself. You already know how to pray by yourself. When you go to the imam's job is not to teach you how to be Muslim. He is a mufti. His job is to teach you how to act like one and to answer your questions on regard. So he's the one that helps you memorize the rest of the Quran. Now, in some of the English-speaking circles, what happens is we send them to an imam who is teaching them the wudu, is teaching them the salah. No. The parents, it's their job to build these basic things first. So you go to the masjid. After the masjid, you are sent to the madrasa. The madrasa is the further studies that take you up until 15, which is your adulthood. After 15, if you want to continue studying, you go to one of 2 places. You go either to the Mahad, which is adult education in the revealed law, or you go to what is called the midras. The midras teaches you funun. I want to be a scientist. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a plumber. I want to be an electrician. But you can't go into these areas when you don't have usul al-shar'iyyah. You can't study funun al-shar'iyyah without usul al-shar'iyyah. But these new universities, the kulliyah, began to come to power. And they attempted to eclipse the jami'ah. So the job of Imam Al-Būṭī and other ulama was to stop that process or to retard it in a major way. And so he did. He wrote more than 50 books over different topics. Symposiums were conducted with other marja' people. And those marja' people were 40 in number. You say, well, what's the big deal about 40 marja' people? Well, the reason why it's a big deal is because of the hadith in Sahih al-Jami', where the Prophet Muhammad said that there are 40 abdal in Sham, and it's due to them that your sustenance and your rain is sent down. It is due to them that your sustenance and your rain is sent down. It is these people, the most high-ranking ulama, the ulama of the ulama. These are the ones that appoint the qadis, they appoint the judges, and down from them, those judges then appoint the imams of the masjid who are muftis, and then down from them, they appoint the different people. All of that process is coming from the marja' people, who have what is called, again, global jurisdiction. They are in charge of all matters, temporal and spiritual. Mahmud Shaltut, at the end of the 60s, going into the 70s of the Kafir calendar, was now close to death. He called Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī to come to him with other ulama. After years of talking with this man, Mahmud Shaltut said, I want everyone that is here to bear witness to what I say. All of the theology that I have taught before, and all the books that I've written, I want them destroyed. The theology that I narrate to you now is the same as yours, and I want this to be remembered among the people when I die. Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī was the foremost reason that Allah used to guide Mahmud Shaltut away from the Mu'tazila and to change his heart towards Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the reverberation of that was felt throughout the rest of Egypt. The unfortunate part about it, though, was by the time he had died, he had already taught a generation of imams who had now come back to the English-speaking countries and to teach their people. So when you find a huge preponderance of imams saying that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are sister religions and we're all brothers, that's from Mahmud Shaltut. If you find Ahmed Didat, Zakir Naik, Shabir Ali, all teaching that Nabiyuna Isa alayhi salam was hung on the cross but swooned and was taken down, woke up in the tomb and escaped, that's Mahmud Shaltut. That is his theology. It's also Ahmadi theology. Now Mahmud Shaltut, rahimahullah, he's pardoned because he repented. But the problem is his theology, what was left over, that still is circulating among the Ummah. So the marja' people had a huge job. Now, one of the books that Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Al-Būṭī wrote is called Al-Madhabiyya. It's been translated into English. And the book says that Al-Madhabiyya, abandoning the madhabs, is the most dangerous bid'ah threatening the Islamic Sharia. The reason why this book was brought about is because Salafiyya was gaining a foothold in Sham. Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī decided, along with other maraji' like Imam Ismail ibn Badran, like Imam Abdul Rahman al-Shami, to attack it head on. And by attacking it head on, you had to address it, because there were people saying that the madhabs can be ignored, one is not obliged to follow one, and so Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī went after this topic with vigor and with gusto, and he demolished their arguments. It is one of the finest pieces of literature on the topic, and it's short and pithy where someone can follow it. It's a very good book. Another one of the books that he wrote was Fiqh al-Sirah al-Nabawiyya, the fiqh of the Sirah, the prophetic Sirah. This is in Arabic, but it's also been translated into English. In this book, he gives you a summarized, distilled breakdown of Imam Ibn Hisham, Al-Tabari, and other Sirah scholars. He gives you a complete picture of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He gives you a complete picture of him, who he is, what he represents, what he's done. In addition to the fact that at the end he tells you how revealed law is established. Because in his time, as the 1970s of the Kafir calendar began to appear, you had what we are calling now in some circles political Islam, but there was a rise of people who were saying that we need to establish an Islamic state. And he attacks many of these doctrines as Marxist, and also undermines the credentials of those who claim that they are bringing the revealed law. At the end of the book, it's one of the soundest and distilled and shortest examples of what you should look at as a basic Sirah book if you want to start with something. His oldest son, whose name is Tawfiq, Imam Tawfiq Al-Būṭī. His oldest son is a teacher in Al-Fiqh Al-Islami in Damascus. Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī was asked in an interview about any of his children following his path, and he said that Imam Tawfiq Al-Būṭī follows my path, and he said that inshaAllah he is my successor and he will surpass me in knowledge. So this is an example of a living marja conferring marja'iyya on someone, conferring authority on someone in their lifetime. And this happens. This happened when Abu Bakr radiallahu anh conferred marja'iyya on Umar. And this happens, marja'iyya can be conferred by a panel, it can be conferred by a living one on a dead one, or a living one who is to die on one who is to come after. These things are true. They occur. And it was done in this case. So the successor to Imam Al-Būṭī's knowledge, rahimahullah, is his son, which is Imam Muhammad Tawfiq Al-Būṭī. His written legacy also includes his text, Kubra al-Yaqiniyat al-Kawniyya, which is proof of how deeply he studied ilm al-funun, the knowledge of funun. Within this book you find doctrines broken down into bite-sized pieces that someone can grasp. It's in Arabic. I believe it's also been translated into English. He's broken down the doctrine of evolution in such a systematic fashion that at the end of the book, even if you still hold to the evolutionary doctrine, you certainly have to rethink your position, because he dealt it that much of a devastating blow. Because he's a scientist himself by funun. According to funun, he's a scientist himself. He also set up a panel of maraji' to deal with another tribulation that started, which was called fiqh al-aqalliyat, the fiqh of minorities. And this tribulation was sent to try the Ummah, in the sense that people were saying we need to have a new madhab to deal with new issues because these matters never occurred before. Imam Al-Būṭī said that such declarations were tantamount to making halal haram and haram halal and saying the revealed law is incomplete, because all answers to questions in the revealed law, all answers to questions can be found through the tools and disciplines of usul al-fiqh. By saying that we have to look outside of the system, or that what Islam is currently is not sufficient, is evidence of a bankrupt mind. He also saw the rise of a new form of Muslim, what's called the moderate or secular Muslim. The moderate or secular Muslim has a basic tenuous hold on Islam, but they espouse all of the earthly, fleshly, carnal doctrines of the world. And when they are corrected with this, they denounce and say that you cannot judge me, Iman is in my heart. You can't judge. When he was appointed at 30 years of age the Imam of Jamia Umayyah, he took great pains to divorce people from this understanding. Now, I want to give you just an understanding of the Jamia Umayyah so you have a clear picture of what that institution represents. Jamia Umayyah, originally, before it was a masjid and before the Syrian people were Muslim, was a basilica built on the spot where Nabiyuna Yahya alayhi salam was buried. During the lifetime of Nabiyuna Yahya alayhi salam, the local ruler wanted to marry his own niece. They wanted Nabiyuna Yahya alayhi salam to conduct the marriage, and he refused to. He was beheaded, and after his execution, his body and his head were buried in what was a basilica. The people in Syria became Muslims. They built a masjid, the Umayyah Masjid, around that area. And it's the largest masjid in Sham. Within the masjid grounds or campus are also the remains of many of the household of the Prophet ﷺ when they were frog marched back from the despicable actions that occurred in Karbala. When they were frog marched back from Iraq to Sham, many of them, their resting place is on the grounds of the Umayyah family masjid. Those that have stood as imams and preachers in that masjid include Imam al-Nawawi, Shamsuddin ibn Qudama, Imam Muwafiquddin ibn Qudama, Al-Mizzi, and countless others. So when he was appointed as Imam, and he stood on the veranda, and he put his hands on the mimbar, bracing it, and also seeking barakah from thousands of other ulama that have stood and touched that mimbar, he was in good company. Marja over millennia have stood on that mimbar and addressed the congregation. Now it was his turn. Within the Umayyah Masjid, all four madhabs are taught in separate corners of the masjid. And theology is also emphasized. But the Imam was the head, Imam Al-Būṭī was the head over the entire structure. Imam Al-Būṭī never held a government post such as Mufti of Syria, because Mufti proposes or assumes jurisdiction. If you are the Mufti of Egypt, you can only pass fatwa for your jurisdiction. He never held a post because the jurisdiction of a marja is global. If you look at marja people, the vast majority of them don't hold posts like qadi or other things because their jurisdiction is beyond that. If you have global jurisdiction, how can you take a jurisdiction-specific post? You can't. That's why they are not the Mufti of Syria or the Mufti of this country. The Muftis are under them. The Muftis are under their control. The Muftis are their students. So Imam Al-Būṭī did not have a government post. He was not a government scholar, as is often stated by certain people in the English-speaking world, and a few in the Arabic-speaking world. A written legacy was huge by Imam Al-Būṭī. Now I want to start to talk to you about some of his rulings, because he left a big footprint regarding rulings. The first area that I want to discuss with you is theology. Imam Al-Būṭī wrote extensively on theology and believed that ilm al-kalam should be used sparingly simply because of the amount of debating that occurs and argumentation. He believed in a simple theology, a simple creed, but one that was firmly based upon the first three generations and the mainline creeds that came after. So when an attempt was made to draw Imam Al-Būṭī into arguments regarding ilm al-kalam and ahad hadith, can Allah lie or not, and other just completely facile discussions, rather than even entertain the question, he denounced those people. He was firm. He was firm. And because of that firmness, no one wasted his time, and he didn't waste other people's time. In terms of tasawwuf, or ihsan, the Imam had a decentralized understanding of what tasawwuf is. Decentralized meaning this: he held the position that the great majority of people today, calling themselves Sufi sheikhs, were imposters, liars, and criminals. This is not unusual because it's the same position of Imam Abdul Qadir ibn Badran, who said they all belong to mystery cults and should be destroyed or fought. And he's referring to today's people that say, we are Sufi sheikhs. He believed that someone's personal holiness and their worship could be made greater and strengthened by worship of Allah being increased, by the perfection of good manners, and by emulating step by step the very example of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He believed there was no such avenue outside of that. Other marja people of his time held him in high regard and made clear so. One such marja was the marja Imam Ismail ibn Badran. He was once asked, who are the most righteous scholars of this time, and who is in charge of the affairs in this age and era? So the interviewer, who was in Kuwait, is asking a valid question. Who is in charge of the affairs of the Ummah in this age? The interviewer understands Ismail ibn Badran is marja, so he's asking, besides you, who else? Imam Ismail ibn Badran's response was, in this time, by the virtue of Allah, there are present scholars, high-ranking scholars who act, and fuqaha of high rank and knowledge. Yes, in Sham, we have the respected scholars. These scholars over the entire Muslim world, not just over Sham, have jurisdiction. And they are scholars such as Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī, Muhammad Ratib, Muhammad Qurayyim Rajih, and Mahdi Mustafa An-Nur. Close quote. So he's giving you an example when you're looking at global jurisdiction, not regarding what happens if I felt desire and I touched my wife. He's not talking about these people-to-people statements, because those are things that your local muftis or your imams in your area should have already taught you. We're talking about who is in charge of the Ummah in global jurisdiction. What rulings are we looking for, and who's in charge of giving them? And he gave you some names that you should be looking for besides himself. So if he dies, or if he's gone, or if you can't find his rulings, these are the people that are in charge of the affairs of the Ummah on a global scale. Their fatwa hold jurisdiction over the entire area. They are not muftis. Because of the fact of him being a mujtahid of derivation, he was often mistaken for being an absolute mujtahid. Because their rank is so high, the rulings that they give, they're often mistaken for absolute mujtahids. In 3 separate interviews, he repeatedly stressed the fact that he was not an absolute mujtahid. Because other ulama below them hold them in such high regard, because their knowledge is so great, they often mistake them for absolute mujtahids. This is often a mistake that's made because they see their knowledge and their rank, they think they're absolute mujtahids. But they are not. They are the maraji' for this period. So he believed that he was not an absolute mujtahid. He stated that Imam Shafi'ii and those contemporary to him were the last of the period of absolute mujtahid. So that's Imam Ahmad, Imam Shafi'ii. That contemporary period, there have been no absolute mujtahids since that time. Such a thing is not possible. And they said, why? The interviewer asked why. He said, because of the lowering of knowledge, the lowering of ikhlas, and the increase in chasing after earthly affairs. Never mind just the knowledge, just the desire to do it for the sake of Allah. That's decreased among people. You'll meet people now that have done their 4-year alim course, or their 2-year alim course, or their 6 months mufti course. And they're among the most corrupt, wicked, and underhanded and deceitful people you can ever meet. Because the desire isn't there. They couldn't get into school. They couldn't play a Stradivarius violin so well. They couldn't be engineers. They couldn't play football. They couldn't play cricket. So what happened? They said, you're going to go to Imam school. They sent them there. And it's unfortunate, but some of the lower ranking levels of people and unintelligent people in certain segments of the Muslim communities are often put into the position of being imams or hufaz. And the most brilliant people they sometimes take and they put them in medical school. They make them lawyers. They make them doctors. And the people that are under that, they sometimes take them and put them in the most underhanded ways and then shove them and say, well, you're going to lead the salah and be an imam. When actually we should be taking the best and most brilliant minds of us and putting them in there. And you can see with Imam Al-Būṭī's example how this has come to pass. He also, with regards to Palestine, I need you to listen to this very carefully because it's a very nuanced point, but it's an important point. When the Palestinian issue increased, scholars broke into two camps regarding Palestinians using special operations or unusual forms of combat to fight an aggressive enemy that had all the tools and machinery and mechanics of a modern nation state. There were 4 scholars who gave fatwa in this matter in the affirmative. 2 of them are marja. The vast majority of scholars stated that for someone to use himself as a weapon with explosives was impermissible and is tantamount to suicide. And they referred to this action as tafjir, which means self-immolation or destruction, or qatl al-nafs, suicide. However, a minority of scholars differed. These include Imams Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī and Imam Wahba al-Zuhayli, as well as Shaykh Umar Abdul Rahman and Shaykh Abdullah Azzam. These scholars, 2 of whom marja, stated that Palestine is a very particular case. Therefore, it was permitted just in the case of Palestine for the people there to use weapons and operations to detonate charges on themselves against military targets only. And they termed this amaliyat ul-Istishhadiyya, martyrdom operations. Imam Al-Būṭī is one of only a handful of people on earth from among the ulama that allows this. All other ulama today that speak on this matter in a positive sense only do so because they're following Imam Al-Būṭī and Imam Wahba al-Zuhayli. I'm not telling you what position to take. I'm telling you that it's here and it exists. And there were conditions that governed it. He also stated that under no circumstances should a Muslim living in what is called Palestine leave that land to the children of Israel because it is a waqf, it is an endowment to the Muslim world, and to do so intentionally would be an act of kufr and treachery. He is right in line with Muhammad Abdul Latif as-Subki, who is another marja. He is right in line with Imam Muhammad al-Ahmadi al-Zawahiri, the great Egyptian marja, who is the grandfather, ironically, of Ayman al-Zawahiri, the spiritual head of Al-Qaeda. Imam Muhammad al-Ahmadi al-Zawahiri is the grandfather of the spiritual head of Al-Qaeda today. It's very strange, these things. And it's strange that the ruling that Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī gave in favor of it is so ajib that the faceless cowards that murdered him used his statement on that ruling to do that to him. It's such an ajib thing. But he clung to that ruling and held on to it. Shaykh Umar Abdul Rahman backed away from it in 1997 because he felt that the conditions that governed it were no longer tenable and that the conditions surrounding it were not delivering the responses originally believed at the time that the ruling was given. Shaykh Abdul Azzam gave a similar statement before his death in 1989. As far as we know, the 2 marjas they have not retracted their position. We know Imam Al-Būṭī did not, and we know Imam Wahab al-Zuhayli did not. So this was his position. With regards to hijrah and travel, Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī did not believe that it was permitted for people to leave from the Muslim heartland countries to come out here unless they were coming for da'wah, to preach the faith, in which case they would have to obtain permission, medical treatment, knowledge that the Muslims needed, or any similar excuse. I remember one of his fatwas when someone said, I'm on my way to study in Canada. What would you advise I bring back in terms of knowledge from the university? The fatwa began after the Basmala and opening praise and salat and salam as stating, you have assumed in your question that it is permitted for you to undertake the journey that you were doing. So this is someone that understood very clearly what matters were. He forbade Muslims from intentionally taking nationalistic tendencies and citizenships because it amounted to swearing by other than Allah and swearing allegiance to other than Allah, which is tantamount to major kufr and major shirk. And he referenced Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th Surah, 51. He referenced all the examples and evidences that we have discussed before. On the topic of al-jihad, Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī was very particular, and he was one of the first 15 maraji' to have given the ruling inciting Muslims to go to Afghanistan and help their brothers. Afghanistan is a jihad that was based on an ijma' of the maraji'. No maraji' differed in Afghanistan. Everyone was clear. He was one of the first 15 to give the ruling on the matter. He was a landmark and trendsetter in terms of he gave landmark rulings and was a trendsetter. He was one of the first 3 maraji' to address sex change operations and what that means for someone saying, for example, they're a Muslim but they've had a sex change operation. How should they be addressed? How should they be dealt with? He was the first one to address, or the first 2 marja' to address matters to do with inheritance, where you have a mother that has eggs, but her daughter is infertile. So the mother donates an egg to her daughter. The daughter takes the egg, becomes fertile, has the child. But the child is both the daughter and the granddaughter of the one who gave the egg to the daughter. Now, what do you do in that matter? He was one of the first 2 marja' to pronounce on that matter. Genetically modified foods. He was one of the first 4 maraji' to discuss that matter in depth and possible pitfalls that could happen. Grinding up sick cattle and feeding them to healthy cattle mixed with their hay was a question that he was asked, and he discussed it. Interfaith. When the Pope John Paul II came to see the remains of Nabiyuna Yahya alayhi salam, saying that the masjid, as far as he was concerned, was still a basilica, Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī gave the ruling that the masjid remains as a masjid. And the people that you're coming to see are no longer Christian, they're Muslim. And a kafir should not be given entrance into the masjid unless shahada is being given to him simultaneously. And so he was firm on his rulings and was unafraid of what anyone would say. And people took issue with some of the rulings that he gave. Now, a statement that is often made, and I've quoted many things about him, someone stated that he gave a ruling in favor of pornography. And this is incorrect. The Imam never gave any ruling in favor of pornography. In fact, he gave a ruling against pornography. And I want you to understand something that is important, because it can be stressed again and again and again. When the Imam was asked the question, he was asked the question regarding naked or sex scenes on television. And if someone happens to be in a gathering in which they're exposed to these things. I'll read the question to you. Is it true what I have read in the book of Fatawa that was issued by the Department of Iftah in Dubai regarding the unlawfulness of watching disgraceful films after which one must repent? Sometimes, however, while watching social programs, snapshots show actresses revealing their charms in a disgraceful manner, such as scenes in which they are dancing, or sometimes it is just the actresses themselves as they appear in programs without being properly covered. Thus, what should a believing man do? Answer for Imam Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī: there is no doubt about the unlawfulness of deliberately watching pornographic films. As for the male viewer who comes across transient, disgraceful scenes in normal programmings and films, what is required of him is to turn away and not look at them. If the nafs is taking control and one cannot avoid watching, then repentance is a treatment, and seeking forgiveness from the heart is what will rectify one's state and wipe out sin. This is taken from Ma'an-Nas, Mashurat al-Fatawa by Imam Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī, Volume 2, pages 203 to 204 from the 2003 Darul Fiqh edition. It shows you then that the Imam had one of two issues. Firstly, that he never gave any rulings in favor of pornography, which is a strange rumor being circulated. But number two, he starts off with the assumption that one would not be caught watching television. If you go through to the Maraja', you will find almost without exception, you will almost find no marja' giving a tacit approval for the use of television. Unless you control that venue, in which you control the channels, or you control what's coming through, it is not halal to watch those things, because you cannot control what images will come next. Let me give you an example. You're watching The Rise of the Nazi Empire, the documentary on the History Channel, on your terrestrial television set. You're not doing anything to anyone. And in between episodes, a commercial comes on for Massengill, or Stay Soft, or Viagra, or Cialis. And they are showing you the human body in such a way in which nothing is being left to the imagination. You just want to come in and watch your 22 minutes of news summarized from the rest of what's happened in a 24-hour day. And the woman is completely exposed and naked but wearing clothes. How do you go about staring the wife in the face after staring at these women? This is the question. So he looked at the matter of pornographic films, as all ulama have. This is unlawful. Regarding television, that you would not be caught in that situation. But if you happened to be at someone's house and it was that green gamma ray box was blazing in the background, and you happened to be caught there, what you would do. So his position was very stern, but at the same time he was balanced. And so when slaves of Allah came to him, he gave them balanced fatwa, and he sought to guide aright the slaves of Allah. But as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned, kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut, every soul must taste death. And so, on the 9th or 10th of Jumad ul-Ula, 1434, The Imam, rahimahullah, was martyred while in Masjid al-Iman. He is rightly referred to by some ulama after his passing as one of the mujaddids of this age. That is not an exaggerated statement, because the impact and footprint that he has left on this ummah and scholars, by and large, those we know and those we don't know, is so huge that they say this out of truth, not out of any exaggeration, and not out of any seeking of personal benefit or aggrandizement. I want to say in the closing about Imam Al-Būṭī rahimahullah that this great Imam, this great mountain, what all ulama have in common, what they all have in common, is they all have the Sharia in common. So this Imam, as much as he's not even from my particular school. The area where he studied theology is different to mine. His madhab is different to mine. But we all proclaim and stand upon Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, Muslim Orthodox. And it's for that reason that we should celebrate the fact that Allah has blessed us with so many ulama, so many maraji', so many righteous people. Our problem is that there's a lot of background noise, and so we sometimes don't know who the people are in charge. So one of the people that was in charge of this ummah that we're talking about today is an example of that. So you can look towards them and say, these are the people. Other examples have been given by Imam Ismail ibn Badran. Other examples are on the website, on Mirath, which is actually a website we've dedicated to the maraji', the marja' people. So if you look under Mirath and then type Al-Basra, it will come up, and they are from the well-known schools of the Ummah, these maraji', the past global fatwa. And we can look and see their rulings in their fatwa. The example has been left where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said in a hadith in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, إِنَّمَا الْعُلَمَاءُ وَرَثَةُ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ. The scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. The prophets leave behind no silver or gold coinage, but they leave behind knowledge. And whoever takes a hold of it has taken hold of much good indeed. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم أستغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم يرحم الراحمين. I said what I've said, and I've made a statement about the Imam. Is there any question from the gathering here, what we've discussed about the Imam? Yes, brother.
You said he studied something, I don't know the name of the subject was, but it was how to carry Islam.
Yes, how to carry out Islam. There were two areas he studied this in. This is called Falsafatul Islam, the philosophy of Islam, how to carry it out, what you should be like, Falsafatul Islam, and At-Tarbiyatul Islamiyya, Islamic upbringings or Islamic rearing.
Is this like a book? Is like books that...
There are a set of books and a curriculum that deals with this. We went through an example of one of those from Al-Adab al-Shar'iyya. We went through that. I think probably at some point we'll want to go through that again, because it gives an example of characteristics, what your behavior should be like, and so on and so forth. It covers those matters. Yes? Is there another question? Yes. Salam alaikum.
It's supposed to be 40 Abdal on the earth at all time. Now with one being passed away, how will you choose another one? Or is it already in place for his son to take over his place?
Question is regarding the 40 Abdal in the earth, and when one dies, another fills his place. And how is that gone about, and how is that taken care of? Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. With regard to the Abdal, Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī, upon his death, his son stepped into the void that he left. And it was something that he had already put into place before he died, because he said that my son after me تخلفني. And he used it in the past tense. My son has succeeded me, which is the sense that it's something that's already there, it's already in place. So what will happen is the maraji' will either, the way that the maraji' go about choosing one of their own is by a panel that will choose a marja, or there will be one marja who should declare the marja'iyah of the one that's with him. So an example would be Imam Bahrul Ulum al-Shami. He died 90 years ago. He was declared marja when he was 30 by his teacher, who was marja. Right? Another example of marja'iyah is if you're in a gathering and you're teaching scholars, and a marja says to you, you should write a book of fiqh. When they tell you that, that means that you're a marja, because in the process of writing a book of fiqh, you're going to derive new opinions and new rulings. When they tell you that, and I'll give you an example of this. Imam Muwaffaquddin Qudama rahimahullah, at the onset of his book Al-Umdah, he says, quote, I was asked by some of my companions to compile a book on fiqh and to answer questions. He was asked that question when he was 27. He was given marja'iyah at 27. That's a record. The earliest marja'iyah that we know of is 18. He was given marja'iyah at 27. So usually when they get asked a question like that, it's either declared outrightly or it's asked in a roundabout way, like you should write a book on this, or you should start giving rulings to the masses. When they say the awam, then that starts to tell you this is marja'iyah. This individual has global jurisdiction. Yes? Is there another question? Yes. Assalamu alaikum.
What was the Imam's position with regards to the current situation in Syria, in the context of the leader of Syria and the opposition?
The question was regarding the position of Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī with regard to the Syrian opposition and the ruler of Syria. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Over 17 pages of material on fatwa by Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Ramaḍān Al-Būṭī has been left behind. And from the beginning of the demonstrations up until his death, he used very severe language. One of the statements that he used against the demonstrations is he referred to them as scum. And at another point he said they're zubal, garbage. And one of the reasons that he used that language is he said that the great majority of the people that are involved in these don't pray. And they're out demonstrating while they should be praying Jumad. And these same people, as if a proof of what he was saying, after he gave the Jum'ah khutbah in the masjid, were shouting and ranting like idiots. And Imam Muḥammad Saʿīd Al-Būṭī had to actually come down from the minbar and leave the masjid. If you want to see this disgusting spectacle, just as an example of how Allah can curse a people, you go look it up and look at Imam Būṭī has to leave masjid after Jum'ah. Just look that up. And you can see how disgusting of a spectacle it is, where maraja' actually have to leave the masjid because there's so much noise and racket in a masjid where there's people that are actually, there's a prophet that's on the grounds of that masjid and they're making that much noise like a bunch of thugs that they leave the masjid. And they saw, the crazy thing about it is the people that did that, they saw that as a victory, and they actually brought la'na upon themselves and they saw it as a victory, unfortunately. Now with regards to the leaders of Syria or the rest of the Muslim world, the maraji' are always apolitical. And what that means in the sense that they don't directly involve themselves in the thrones of the rulers, but they will pronounce on matters. And one of the things that the Imam said, the reason why he advised people not to rise up against him is because he stated that Bashar al-Assad is fighting for a throne. If you fight him, then you are fighting him for his throne. He also stated that he has the power to bring greater tribulation upon you than you already have. Right now you have lessons, you have Jum'ah. And one of the first things he said when the army began retaliating, the government began retaliating, he said, now you have areas where people can't even pray Jum'ah. They're scared to come outside. They're scared to go learn. They're scared to come to durus. They're terrified to come and learn. Because why? When they went after that man's throne, the first thing that he did is he defended it. So then that opens up the door to, well then, how do we redress wrongs when they happen? Well, wrongs are redressed through the muftis, the qadis, and the muraji'. If they say that it is not the time to do it, then it should not be done. This fatwa was preceded, Imam Al-Būṭī's fatwa was preceded by 30 muraji' from Duma who said not to do it. And they said that if the protesters are killed, they won't pray on them, that they won't give them salam. It was really highly charged moment. And they accused the muraji' of being government agents and all these other things. Now, with 1 million Syrians outside of the country, masjids destroyed in rubble, ancient areas flattened, now what do they think? You see, the muraji', as I said, it's not just temporal power, it's spiritual power. They can see into events and understand what the ruling is. And Imam Al-Būṭī always mentioned not to be ruled by your emotions. And the people that are involved in this are ruled by their emotions. Now, however long it's going to take them to beat this government, now they think that it may have been chemical weapons, or one party or both parties are now using chemical weapons. But what started this whole thing off? The demonstrations and all these other things. When they should have been listening to their fuqaha and ulama and doing what they told them to do, which was to stand down, and that the wickedness and the other things, to bear with patience and to wait, and then they'll give their command. Had it been the case, all of these governments are so weak and so facile in many ways. If Imam Al-Būṭī, being alive, had said this government should be gone, it would have collapsed. It would have gone. And we see examples of the marja' being done, like in the case of Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la, where he made a pronouncement and the government, that was the end of it. He took over the government. He just completely ruled it. Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, when it was time to take over Egypt, he walked into the masjid in the middle of the khutbah of the Fatimi Shia, came in, snatched the man down from the minbar, and took over. If that needs to be done, it can be done. If it doesn't need to be done, then it won't be done. And we have to have a such thing as a pecking order. Americans have a pecking order. English people have a pecking order. The Catholic Church has a pecking order. But there are some Muslims who think that we don't have a pecking order. But we do. So I'm not saying that no one has a right to defend themselves, because Imam Al-Būṭī, on the back of that discussion, when it mentioned that people were being forced to prostrate to images of Bashar al-Assad, or people were being attacked in their homes, he gave permission for them to defend themselves. But that didn't nullify the fatwa that he gave before, that you had no business doing those demonstrations in the first place, because they're coming from Marxism and other places. Yes. Is there another question from the people gathered here? No. Is there a question by yourselves over the phone, brother? All right. The question the brother asked me on the phone was regarding where Imam Al-Būṭī talked about genetically modified foods. Okay. The answer to this question, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. If you try to find the 1997 Ash-Sharq al-Awsat, I don't remember the volume number. If you try to find that original edition where he addresses genetically modified foods, he and 2 other maraji' are asked about the matter. And they don't give a blanket answer that they're all haram or they're all halal. The statement that they gave was that it depends upon how great the modification has been, whether it changes the body of the product, and whether they've done any tests on the product or long-term trials to know for a surety what the long-term consequences are of consuming that product. So they gave a very cautious fatwa in that regard. Al-Sharq Al-Awsat, the newspaper, 1997. If I'm correct, it was March, but I don't know the volume number of the because that newspaper has volumes like volume 28 or volume so and so. Wait, no problem. All right. So inshallah, if there are no further questions, then we'll close from here. And inshallah, next week when we will return back to our tafsir class, and we will go from there. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك إنه غفور رحيم يا أرحم الراحمين والسلام عليكم.